So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Welcome to panel 2 of the 9th Katagalan Forum. I'm Inka Vat. I'm the host of Taiwan Talks, which is Taiwan's only English language geopolitical talk show. It is my great pleasure today to chair the discussion on countering hybrid warfare and strengthening whole of society defense resilience. Now, where we define hybrid warfare as a mix of conventional and unconventional warfare, or military and non-military warfare, and no doubt Kerry will talk in more detail about the definitions. Also, where unconventional covers tactics such as disinformation, cyber attacks, election interference, territorial salami, slicing, and so on. So we can say that the CCP has spent roughly 100 years slowly and patiently perfecting its hybrid warfare capabilities. It has had a single aim, avenging its humiliation, its century of humiliation carried out by Western powers by becoming the preeminent global superpower. And then there is the defeat and absorption of Taiwan. And so for Taiwan and the United States and others, the China threat hasn't just been military for many decades, but also in that space between war and peace. And the more China has advanced its military and economic power, the closer that goal appears, and therefore the faster its hybrid warfare campaign has intensified. But China is not only targeting the US and Taiwan. The Philippines is increasingly targeted in the South China Sea, or West Philippine Sea, in cyber attacks and social media. Japan and South Korea increasingly targeted in the East China Sea and West Sea in cyber attacks and social media. India continues to be targeted in the Himalayas and Indian Ocean region, and Australia also in the seas around its country, as well as in cyber attacks and social media. So those are just a few examples. The question is how we recognize hybrid and gray zone warfare in all its forms, and when we decide to take action against it. In what ways can we defend against it and crucially deter this threat, and whether we can come together collectively to do that, as European countries and NATO have tried to do against the Russian hybrid warfare to build greater resilience in this region. So to debate this and more, we have an incredibly distinguished panel of experts, and I'm joined, starting from my right, by Dan Blumenthal, Senior Fellow at American Enterprise Institute. Dan focuses on East Asian security issues and Sino-American relations. He served in and advised the US government on China issues for more than a decade, and this includes being Senior Director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia at the US Department of Defense in 2002 to 2004. Next to Dan is Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Transatlantic Security Initiative in the Stowcroft Center for Strategy and Security of the Atlantic Council. Welcome. Elizabeth is one of the world's leading experts on gray zone and hybrid threats. Next is Christian Brugger, Professor of International Relations, University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Welcome. Christian specializes in maritime security and has held previously several high-level positions in UK universities. Next is Kerry Gashanek, Senior Fellow at Global Risk Mitigation Foundation based in Honolulu and Professor Visiting Scholar at National Chengchi University. I'm holding up now Kerry's book. This is the Mandarin version, translated into Mandarin, of political warfare, which I think that many of you will be familiar with. It's become an important book for many a nation targeted by China. It was referred to by our president, Lai Ching-te, in March as a foundation for our president's 17 strategies for combating China's infiltration and subversion of Taiwan. Kerry has also advised the US Congress and NATO on China's threat and has extensive experience in naval special warfare, intelligence, counterintelligence, and international relations. And last but certainly not least is Yujie Li, Senior Advisor at the National Security Council of the ROC Taiwan, Mr. Lee has advised the Taiwan government for decades on the emerging threats of technology as well as the solutions and opportunities that they present. In terms of the format for this panel, our guests will speak in the order that they're sat to my right, and each will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, after which I'll open up the floor to questions. So without further ado, Dan, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here in Taipei and at this important and I think very productive forum. It's my honor to speak on this topic with such distinguished panelists as well. And I think your initial introduction framed things exactly right, which is political warfare, hybrid warfare, however you want to call it, this combination of subversion, coercion, gray zone, conventional kinetic force, and so on, is not just incidental to Chinese Communist Party strategy, it is how the Chinese Communist Party in fact came to power. It's its birthright, it's in its DNA, subverting, infiltrating, using political warfare alongside conventional tactics against a well-established government, again, is in some ways the history of the Chinese Civil War. So it's essential, point one, it's essential to Chinese strategy and how it thinks about its grand strategy of undermining the U.S. alliance system and of course Taiwan here in the Indo-Pacific. And I think everyone here in Taiwan knows that. You know, you face it every day, disinformation campaigns alongside intimidation tactics by the Chinese Air Force, by the maritime militia, and the combination, I think critically, the combination of both the use of low-intensity kinetic force in conjunction with information and disinformation campaigns. It's important everybody, I think, here in Taiwan knows it, but in the United States, there's still a debate about how important it is to defeat this campaign, which is very surprising and unfortunate, I think, because obviously the Chinese made such great strides using hybrid warfare in the South China Sea in terms of increasing its own territorial ambitions, and undermining others' territorial rights. It's been engaged against Japan in the East China Sea for many years as well. Japan's held fast and held strongly in terms of its own territorial rights. But there's a debate in Washington about how important it is to defeat this campaign, and I would argue it's the ongoing campaign. It must be defeated. China may decide to intensify its current hybrid warfare campaign and launch a full-scale war against Taiwan, but it may decide that it's not necessary to do so and continue to try to cow the Taiwan public and the Taiwan political system. So that goes to point number two. Point number two is the center of gravity of these hybrid warfare campaigns, particularly across the strait, is politics in Taiwan. Now, it's very important for the Chinese Communist Party to also shape politics in Washington and in allied capitals, but the center of gravity for Chinese strategic planners is how do we make it so Taiwan politics is more amenable to our national goals? How do we intimidate Taiwan? How do we make certain parties in Taiwan, the DPP in particular, unacceptable to the Taiwan populace? And how do we get some kind of political resolution after changing Taiwan's politics through hybrid warfare campaigns? The center of gravity is Taiwan politics. Again, China may intensify its ongoing hybrid warfare campaign into something more if it so chooses, but for now, it's going to continue to push, maybe escalate its hybrid warfare campaigns to affect Taiwan politics, to affect Taiwan's sense of isolation, to affect the Taiwan's people will to continue. It's aimed at Washington as well. So the debate that it wants people to have in Washington is in some ways the very debate that we continue to have. The essence of the political competition is essentially China trying to define what the contours and parameters are of Washington's relationship to Taiwan. China trying to define what is and isn't provocative in the relationship. This has been going on since the advent of the One China policy, China trying to redefine the One China policy, trying to say things like transit visits by the president of Taiwan are too provocative, or trying to say the visit of the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was somehow too provocative or changing the status quo. That's how China tries to restrict the decision space and change the decision-making space in Washington as well, again, with its eyes on striking a blow against Taiwan politics. So the idea and concept here of the hybrid warfare campaign is to define certain things as too dangerous, to define certain things as too provocative, such that Washington actually makes decisions to constrict its relationship with Taipei in order for China to strike a morale blow against the Taiwan public. And this is a very deliberate strategy. And there's all kinds of ways, I think, to counter this kind of strategy. The visit of Speaker Pelosi is an example. If, for example, the United States has acted more decisively and said, I'm sorry, but you don't get to define who we send to Taiwan. Part of this unofficial relationship we have with Taiwan is the right to have just about anybody we want go to Taiwan on unofficial visits. The only thing that we owe you, China, is that we promise not to confer diplomatic recognition on Taiwan, but anything below that is up to us to define. So ultimately, this is a political struggle over what kind of relationship Taiwan's going to have with the rest of the world, what kind of relationship Washington is going to have with Taiwan. And we ought to be very aware that China's trying to redefine that for us all the time, again, with its eyes on striking a blow against Taiwan and Taiwan's resilience and so forth. I think the answers in general that Washington and Taiwan should come up with to these hybrid warfare campaigns is asymmetric political responses. So it's not possible to track and respond to every incursion that the PLA makes into Taiwan's airspace or to Taiwan's maritime space, but it is possible to respond at the time in the way of our choosing. So the answer to restricting Taiwan and to isolating Taiwan is in fact to raise Taiwan's international status. So one good response, for example, to things like cable cutting or things like interference in the air defense identification zone of Taiwan would be to increase Taiwan's status multilaterally and exercise to make sure that civil aviation is safe going into Taiwan. This is an asymmetric political cost, and China actually cares about it quite a bit. So if China is actually embarrassed on the world stage, or if Taiwan's status is actually enhanced in response to China's attempt to restrict it and isolate it, that is one way in which China tends to back off. Again, so a response to military intimidation combined with disinformation would be raise Taiwan's profile specifically and functionally in the international system. I just want to wrap up by saying it's very important to defeat these hybrid warfare campaigns and to make sure that Taiwan's public knows that its system is able to operate despite the pressure that China puts it under. I think that the idea that ignoring these gray zone campaigns in order to focus on a possible larger kinetic conflict is a big mistake. I think you have to deter in the gray zone, deter in the space you're being challenged, which has a much better chance to show China that you have the will, both Washington and Taiwan have the will to defeat them should they decide to escalate to conventional means as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. So, Dan, they're arguing for greater decisive action by the US and also raising Taiwan's international profile. Elizabeth Brawl.
Testing. I was thinking, hearing all these alarming reports this morning, and at lunchtime, I was thinking back to happier days in around 2016, 2017, when Twitter was down. I didn't notice that until afterwards, but when I logged on, I saw somebody had written this, or posted this on Twitter. Chatted with my wife while Twitter was down. She seems nice. So those were the happy days back then when we could entertain ourselves by reading Twitter. Now things are much more serious, and as you said, I focus on gray zone aggression, and in the past decade it has grown enormously. It used to be essentially, as I think everybody in this room knows, it used to be cyber, it used to be disinformation, it used to be election interference, it used to be systematic IP theft, which I think is often overlooked, but it is another aspect of grey zone aggression that aims to weaken our countries and strengthen whoever it is that is systematically taking our IP. In the past 2-3 years, the forms of grey zone aggression with which our countries are targeted have grown exponentially, and not just in number of incidents, but also number of categories. And why not? If you are the aggressor in the grey zone, you can continue to innovate because nothing will happen. You are not going to be punished for engaging in grey zone aggression. Why are you not going to be punished? Because you are exploiting the space between war and peace. You're staying below the threshold of war, and our countries, democratic countries, are not going to respond with military means against you because it's risky, it's escalatory. But we are also not going to respond with the same means because we are liberal democracies. If a country, let's say, interferes in our elections, we are not going to say, well, in that case, we'll interfere in your elections. Or if a country engages in systematic cyber intrusion of our critical national infrastructure, we are not going to say, well, if you intrude in our infrastructure, we will intrude back. And that is the one of the fundamental weaknesses of a liberal democracy. So there are two challenges with grey zone aggression. The first is that it's difficult to detect. How do we know when something is happening in our societies that may be grey zone aggression? Because many of these forms of aggression may exist in low intensity levels in our countries anyway. We have cyber attacks, we have people who spread untruths, we have election malfunctions within our electoral processes. How do we know when something is systematic and when the instigator behind it is a hostile state? We may not know until it reaches a very high level of intensity, and by then it may be too late. So that's why I think of grey zone aggression as the defender's dilemma. And I wrote a whole book about the defender's dilemma, and I still don't know the answer to this dilemma, which is how to detect grey zone aggression early and what to do about it. But I do have some partial answers. And one of the first ones is we have to do what Taiwan and some other countries are already doing, which is to involve the wider public as much as we can, not just the wider public as in the citizenry, but also the private sector. And I know you do it here increasingly, for example, by through public awareness campaigns, by working with the private sector. And a fantastic example of that is the collaboration between the government and Chunghwa Telecom on cables. And I remember vividly the 2 cable cuts off the Matsu Islands on the 2nd and 8th of February 2022, or was it 23? The years blur now. 23 was. And the reason that both cables were cut with disastrous consequences was that the reporting system for cable operators to report cable damage was not particularly efficient, and neither here nor in any other liberal democracy, because cables operate in pairs. If one cable is damaged, the operator then puts in a call to repair a company, and they come and repair it after a while. But what should happen, and now has begun to happen, is that the operator should also report it to the government, so the government knows that a cable has been damaged and is aware. But that didn't happen then, and when people found out that there was a problem was when the second cable was cut. They had been taking the traffic for the two cables. The second cable was cut by another Chinese vessel, and then it became clear that there was a problem, right? Because there was only two cables and they had both been cut. The collaboration now is much better, and when the most recent cable cut happened, there was instantaneous reporting by Changhua Telecom to the authorities, so they knew what had happened and could react, and they reacted very quickly, as you may recall. That is exactly what should be happening, and we're seeing more initiatives like that, not just when it comes to cables, but when it comes to all kinds of incidents, because no Western government, no government of a liberal democracy can be everywhere all the time. It needs the help of the public and the private sector, first in detecting things that don't look right, and we are the best judges of what doesn't look right, and then when it comes to building resilience, the private sector is a fantastic partner, and I know there is a lot of work happening beyond the telecom sector here in Taiwan to build redundancy. And by the way, I think that can be a competitive advantage for the companies that do engage in it, because if you have redundancy, then your company is going to be able to keep operating even if something happens, whereas your competitor, without redundancy, they will have a big problem if there is some sort of gray zone attack or other damaged, hostile state instigated damage to your company. And by the way, also damage caused by Mother Nature, which is something to be concerned about now that climate change is increasing. So a lot of that is happening. And where we can do even more is to actively invite the public to be part of this, and not just educate them about threats, but invite them to report if they see anything unusual. In countries that have a long history of terrorism, such as the UK, that has been part of the public, the social contract for years, that if you see something that doesn't look right, report it to the authorities. And I'm not trying to put a positive spin on this, but now that the threats are what they are and are likely to increase, this is an opportunity to bring the country closer together, because nobody wants the sort of harm that we get from grey zone aggression. So in an era that has been defined by societal fragmentation, loneliness, and so forth, I'm not saying that it's good that we have grey zone aggression, but now that we have it, being part of the solution is a fantastic opportunity for people to get involved. And it's interesting to see which countries are the most active. Taiwan, but also the Nordic Baltic countries, the UK, the Czech Republic, a wide variety of countries that have few other similarities other than wanting to keep their countries going in case something were to happen, and something will happen. And so this is also, by the way, an opportunity to show your country off to international markets, to FDI investors, to show we will be able to keep going even if there are countries and other actors that wish us ill. And on that note, something I want to flag up, because Russia is good at innovating in the grey zone, something to be acutely aware of is a new fast-growing trend of hostile states recruiting essentially grey zone gig workers on apps who commit one act of gray zone aggression, be it arson, be it carrying placing a parcel bomb somewhere on behalf of the hostile country, they take a picture of whatever they've done, send it to the agent who commissioned them, they get paid, and then they fade back into obscurity. That's another reason for all of us to keep our eyes open and be part of that solution. Over. Time's up.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's okay if we go a bit over 10 minutes. I heard Elizabeth speeding up there at the end. So Elizabeth spoke about, at the end there, very interesting development, gig workers. This increases the plausible deniability of these states. Also, because there's been no cost against the hybrid warfare, essentially we've seen a proliferation, innovation, also the limitations of our liberal democracies, and finally, how this is actually an opportunity for unity, so that coming together that we mentioned. Christian, over to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, a big thank you to the Prospect Foundation and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the hospitality and convening this important forum. I'd like to bring us towards maritime security and also the question of how gray zone/warfare strategies actually have an impact on maritime security more broadly. And I'm going to draw on two pieces of research. One is our book, Understanding Maritime Security, came out last year. And the other one, a big assessment that we have done together with the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. And this was an attempt to do a forward-looking identification of what threats need early action within the United Nations system, but also outside of it. Now, just to set up the context, I think it's quite important why we need to care about maritime security more general, and the scientific research is pretty surprising and straightforward, and it shows us that at no other point in human history have we been as dependent on the sea as we are today. And that is literally a development that has been unfolding since the 1990s. Some have called it the blue acceleration. Others talk about the industrialization of the sea. And that basically means that 80% of global trade comes by the sea, 60% of energy, in some cases such as Taiwan, these figures are even higher, and 95% of transcontinental internet data transfers come by the sea. When we're talking about maritime security, then we're talking about the vulnerabilities that come from these numbers. Our accelerative use of the sea means that we need to pay attention to maritime security, not only regionally and nationally, but globally. Remember the Evergreen accident in the Suez Canal a couple of years back. One single ship in a strategic location caused a global loss event, and economists have estimated that in the range of 8 to 10 billion. Now, there's also some good news. In May this year, the United Nations Security Council actually held a high-level debate on maritime security. And what you could see at this debate is actually a remarkable global consensus that maritime security, in particular maritime crimes, need more attention, more capacity building, clearer norms. But there was also quite an impressive call for peaceful resolution of boundary disputes that we could see in the Council. Now, in that debate, in many ways, member states were looking at what can be called an established maritime security agenda. They were hardly talking about what can be called the gray zone or the hybrid sphere. So in many ways, the UN Security Council was operating or discussing maritime security in a way as if the binaries and distinctions that structure much of the global institutions between war and peace, between civil and military, but also between state and non-state actors would still hold. And this is exactly the key challenge that we are facing when we're talking about hybrid and gray zone warfare. These binaries are deliberately blurred. Now, I think when we're talking about gray zone/hybrid warfare at sea, it is actually quite important that we are clear in our vocabulary, and I think it's of essence to distinguish between two different types of actions. The first is strategic intimidation or acts of provocation, where the purpose of these actions is not to cause physical damage, but to achieve other strategic objectives, for instance, creating uncertainty and pressure. The second type is direct confrontation, and only then it makes actually sense to talk about warfare rather than strategies and tactics. And here we're talking about acts where the intention is to cause immediate damage on an adversary. It's quite an important distinction, not the least in legal terms. Now, if we are looking to European waters as an example, we can see a lot of strategic intimidation, mainly pointing towards Russia, and that includes maritime espionage disguised as scientific research. Some people have seen the documentary on the Russian vessel Yanta. Cable cutting incidents or mysterious accidents, let's call them like that were just referred to. The purpose of these kind of acts is to install vulnerability and uncertainty in European populations, but also keeping the pressure on defense forces to operate under extremely high costs. If you look into the response to gray zone attacks in European waters, the price tag has been quite substantial for that. Now, luckily, a lot of things have been happening by the European Union and NATO, in particular with regards to the Baltic Sea. And in many ways, as someone who has been following this over the long term, the response is quite impressive in terms of improved maritime domain awareness, in terms of rapid regional coordination over law enforcement, and then developing legal framework where that's still a little bit sketchy. The escalatory risks, as we've seen in April this year with an incident with the Estonian Navy, are substantial. In that case, Russia actually responded with sending fighter planes. If we're talking about direct confrontation, I think then we need to start talking a little bit about how Ukraine's defense tactics actually use gray zone warfare, and to the evolution that we are seeing there. And here we're not only talking about drone warfare and cyber attacks, we're also using the new ways of strategically using sea mines. And that is in many ways a little bit worrying, because while I think that obviously the Ukrainian forces have a valid cause, the way that they tend to undermine global legal norms is slightly worrying. And this includes also the way in which they are deliberately taking environmental risks. Now, quite obviously, this is not only happening in China, in Europe, but also in the broader Western Indian Ocean. Now, let me use my last 2 minutes for briefly pointing out to what that means in strategic terms, hoping that some of this can be picked up in the Q&A later on. First, I think we need strength in maritime domain awareness, and we need maritime domain awareness that does not only look at the surface, but looks down underwater, but equally looks up in terms of vulnerabilities linked to satellites. Secondly, critical maritime infrastructure is now absolutely vital, and if Taiwan wants to untap the enormous offshore wind energy potential that it has, it is really, really important to develop an enhanced critical maritime infrastructure protection strategy, not only for the country itself, but for the wider region, together with Philippines, together with Korea, together with Japan and the Pacific Island region. Third, I think it's vital that we talk more about environmental security at sea. Many of these gray zone tactics actually exploit environmental vulnerabilities. And let's not forget, a single shipping accident or a deliberate oil spill can have major environmental impacts and undermine conservation efforts from decades. Finally, I think we should also quite urgently engage in the question of how the future norms of warfare at sea, but also the future peacetime norms should look like. And this is basically why we do need a United Nations process, whether that is within the UN Security Council. The next meeting on maritime security is next Monday, but also in institutions such as the International Telecommunication Union, where we are having a broader discussion on how subsea data cables, for instance, can be better protected. I leave it here, and thank you so much for your attention, and look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So Christian there mentioned how these actors attack our vulnerability and create uncertainty. He also talked about us being never more dependent on the sea as we are today. It's called the blue acceleration. Over to you, Kerry.
Hybrid warfare is a component of political warfare. Now, the depth and breadth of political warfare, if you want to take a look around this room, it goes from the screen behind me, where the cameras are back there. It goes from your right wall to your left wall, everything in between, and in the 10 minutes, 600 seconds I've got here, I can get you about as far as my thumb, but let me hit a couple of wave tops for you. One, I'll talk a little bit about how to conceptualize the existential threat that we face in Chinese Communist Party political warfare, and it is an existential threat to Taiwan, my country, the United States, and I would say to every country represented in this room. I will also talk about the role of leadership and the role of education in this fight. First, let's talk about a holistic way of looking at the threat. I said that hybrid warfare is a component of political warfare. Go back and check the definition. See what the Chinese communists are calling hybrid warfare. They're saying what's basically been said earlier, but they say it very clearly in their doctrinal publications, in their writings from the PLA, what passes as doctrine, in all of their theoretical publications. We're going to push you, basically, we're going to push you right up into the point where you want to go to kinetic war, but you don't have the legal justifications to do it, to fight back against us. We're going to take everything we can and keep pushing you. All right, so that's hybrid warfare. The reason I say that hybrid warfare is a component of political warfare is you have to go back to the first Cold War. A fellow named George Kennan, most of you should have heard of, but he was a diplomat in the United States, and we were getting our butts handed to us by the Soviet Union and Western Europe, all around the rest of the world. And how was the Soviet Union doing it? Yeah, military force, of course, but it was political warfare, taking the Eastern European countries, subverting, it was about ready to take Greece, about ready to take other Western European countries that did get saved. Sad for those who did not. But the point is that it took Kennan, a diplomat with his policy planning group in the U.S. State Department, to wake up the United States government to this concept of political warfare. And what Kennan said, this is very simple, keep it simple, political warfare is all means short of, he didn't say major, kinetic warfare, all means short of kinetic warfare to achieve your national objectives. In effect, what that means, political warfare is all means short of major kinetic warfare, because we're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese Communist Party is, you have to think about this, because this is a different threat than we faced before. It is an expansionist, militarily, economically, and technologically immensely powerful nation, brutally repressive, genocidal, in fact, totalitarian regime. All right, they're not going to quit. You have to make them stop. They are on the attack, and they know that they can corrode us. They can wear us down. How do they do that? Political warfare. They corrode us. They divide, they demoralize, and to use their terminology, they disintegrate us. That's what they're trying to do to annex Taiwan. But they're also doing it in my country. And they have a wide range. The reason I'm saying think the size of this room. All this terminology that we use to define what they're doing to us. We're screwing ourselves into the ground. We're setting ourselves up for defeat through terminology alone. We're paralyzing ourselves. We have disinformation. We have propaganda. We have misinformation. We have strategic psychological operations. We have media warfare, public opinion warfare. We have legal warfare, lawfare. And then we have United Front operations. And we're playing whack-a-mole. And that doesn't even get to those of you who've read the book Unrestricted Warfare. There is an unlimited number of other warfares, tourism warfare, economic warfare, which you're familiar with, but all these other warfares that the CCP is eager to use against us and is using against us. Drug warfare on my country. We got 100,000 dead Americans on the streets of the United States every year, military age mostly. And what's it coming from? Fentanyl. Where's fentanyl coming from? We already had a distinguished guest speaker earlier talk about the fentanyl coming in. It's deliberate, it's intentional, it's destroying the fabric of my country, among many other ways that they're destroying my country internally. I would wager they're doing the same thing to you. So we've got all these attacks coming at us, and yet we still insist on disaggregating them. We parse them out. Well, we're gonna fight fake news here. The United States State Department wasted millions of dollars on fake news. We're going to have a workshop on fake news. That gets you nowhere. That's tactical. That's like being in mid-intensity conflict and you're focusing on the one soldier in the foxhole over there with a rifle over the parapet. That's very tactical. You've got to start thinking, we have to start thinking holistically, strategically. We have to categorize all of these different attacks, again, the way Kennan did in 1948. Let's just call it political warfare. So we're not playing whack-a-mole and trying to take out propaganda and disinformation and election interference over here. If you have a guiding principle, a guiding framework, a holistic view, then you get the president, and we all have elected presidents or equivalents. You can get the president to make the decision we're going to fight. And God bless President Lai, God bless President Marcos, because those are two of my heroes right now, because they said we're going to fight CCP hybrid warfare. Once you get the presidential decision that we will fight, then you get the policy, then you get the strategy, and that's what's lacking in America right now. And I'll come to this 300-page report that I helped the U.S. Congress, this investigation comes back to America's lack of a strategy. You get the policy, you set objectives, develop strategies, you develop the resources, you develop the education programs, you develop the personnel, not just military personnel, because military is very much part of this, your law enforcement, okay, your counterintelligence, your department or ministries of education. It's a whole of government approach that you have to take, or you're going to lose. Whole of society, you have to at least say that. It's aspirational, you're never going to get it, but publicly we have to say it. Try to get that. And you get that if you have some sort of overarching guiding framework and you're not playing whack-a-mole trying to take each one of these attacks separately and devoting resources without any organized, holistic way to confront it. Now, what happens when you don't have the strategy, when you don't even have the willingness to call the threat by the right name? You get the United States government right now. This was a 2-year investigation the U.S. Congress did on just the U.S. government, not on PRC political warfare against business and industry, which is major, against our academia at the subnational level, at the state, city, councils, that sort of level. No, this was just at the U.S. government. 25 U.S. agencies. I know I got it, 2-minute warning. I played football. I know what it means. It's almost over. The point is that of 25 agencies, including CIA, FBI, NSA, National Security Council, and NSA, all of the key ones, State Department, they found out they had no idea what they were facing. They couldn't define. That's where definitions in education come in. The vast majority of people in these agencies, these 25 agencies running my government, had no clue what was going on all around. I mean, you can read the 300-page report. I'll loan it to you, or you can download it. It was pretty horrifying. This is in the words of the representative sent to testify at the investigation. The State Department representative who chaired the so-called China House, supposed to be a key member of the administration's policy making for the People's Republic of China and the CCP, walks into the hearing, senior-most State Department official, and looks dumbfounded and says to the committee, could you tell me what political warfare is? No kidding, it's in the report. This is how ignorant my government has been. I would wager if you go in, college professor hat on here, and you go into any one of your bureaucrats or your senior elected officials and you said, take out 5 sheets of paper, 1 pen, define political warfare, give 3 examples how it's being waged against your country, Canada, Marshall Islands, etc., and then go down the list. What's United Front? What are they doing? I would wager that 99% would get an F, okay? So education is important. Where does education start? Yeah, it starts at the macro level. We wiped out our political warfare education in 1991 when we thought we'd won the first Cold War. My time is up. Let me just give a shout out to 2 organizations doing good I got time? Yes, I do. Thank you. Shout out to 2 organizations doing some good, clever education. All right? You're looking at this coffee graph and you're saying, my gosh, that is beautiful. Is that Starbucks? Is it Yves Saint Laurent? Is it Gucci? No, that's the Republic of the Philippines, the Armed Forces of the Philippines. It is a coffee carafe that they distribute in the Philippines that talks all about the West Philippine Sea. So that's one way you get past TikTok. That's one way you just come up with creative ways on the very low level, but mass level, to get out the word on the political warfare, in this case, the hybrid warfare for the West Philippine Sea. Association of Taiwan Journalists. Again, you look at local resilience. You look at Taiwan resilience. There's a number of organizations, several organizations you should be out there supporting. I'm working with the Association of Taiwan Journalists. They're building an education program that is aimed at reporters. Because if the reporters can't tell the real story, if they don't know, if they're the victims of media warfare or other, just victims of never being properly educated, no way they can tell the story to your publics. So education on a mass level is absolutely essential. And with that, I give up my mic.
Thank you, Kerry. So, Kerry, they're telling us about the holisticness of the CCP's political warfare, and therefore the approach that we must take must also be holistic to combat what China's goal is, which is to disintegrate its enemies, as well as expressing disappointment in the US's approach to it. Final speech from Mr. Lee.
I totally agree with your point. Education is so important. So, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak following such insightful contribution from previous estimate panelists. They have illustrated clearly that hybrid warfare is no longer theoretical. It is our daily reality, in particular in Taiwan. I have served as a senior advisor to the President Lai for past 15 months. During the time, I have been deeply involved with the defense community and emerging technologies including AI, cybersecurity, unmanned system, and space technology, including telesat communications. I also oversee the resilience planning across critical sector, communication, energy, finance, and transportation. As part of President Lai's Whole of Society Resilience Initiative, digital security, undersea cable, and the critical infrastructure are among the key areas I monitor every day. During my time at the NSC, I frequently encounter discussion referencing the timeline of 2027. As you know, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, reaffirmed that at the Shangri-La Dialogue in May 2025. This timeline reflects not only intent, but also growing capabilities. Taiwan's strategy is to deter conflict, and our response to hybrid warfare, whether in 2027 or sooner, must be open, innovative, and rooted in all of society defense. Taiwan is among the most targeted society in cyberspace. In response, we have launched the National Cybersecurity 2025. We named Cybersecurity is National Security. In this strategy, we have 4 key pillars of cybersecurity, including the whole of society defense resilience. It's not only the traditional cybersecurity, it's including the hybrid warfare as well. And the second pillar is about the critical infrastructure. And we do believe that when the critical infrastructure under the massive cyber attack, that's a very clear signal for the Chinese invasion. So we pay a lot of attention on the critical infrastructure security. The third pillar is about the supply chain securities. And actually that's inspired by the US DOD. They have a CMMC. We are not, the government have to purchase a lot of hardware, software, even the service from the vendor, from the private sector. Even the product is secure enough, but if the vendor security level is not match the standard, it will create a vulnerability to the entire government. So the third pillar, we will focus on the vendor, we care about the supply chain securities. The fourth one is about the emerging technology, namely that's artificial intelligence. We do believe that the AI can help cybersecurity industry, but when you rely on AI system more, you create more vulnerabilities. AI itself might be the big threat of the cybersecurities. Actually, in order to improve our critical infrastructure security, we have an organization called the National Institute of Cybersecurity. We formed a team called the OT exercise that's focused on the OT technology cybersecurities. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we have prioritized, including the power grid, energy supply, transportation network, financial system. Right now it's under constant threat. We have to build up the collaboration platform with others. This engagement has yet significant progress in strengthening our collective cybersecurity protection. We believe that enhanced intelligence sharing and malware forensics can help trace attack footprint and increase the transparencies. Ultimately will reduce their violence and the impact. You probably already see the Netflix series called 0 Day. That's a wide-scale cyber attack on critical infrastructure. That's offering a valuable lesson to decision maker and policy maker in the real world. China's recent wave of cyber attack, whether known as a Seoul Typhoon, Vol Typhoon, or others, targeting US, UK, Australia, and Japan are designed to enable rapid, destructive cyber operation against critical infrastructure. We believe this attack was deliberate experiment conducted by China, intended to test the ability to paralyze critical infrastructure during a potential Taiwan Strait conflict, thereby delaying or obstructing timely international assistance to Taiwan. Taiwan operates 14 international and 10 domestic undersea cable, and which are vital for internet connectivities and nationwide communication. In 2025 alone, we record at least 4 disruptions. This underscores the urgent need to enhance the communication resilience to ensure Taiwan remained connected to the rest of the world. Redundancies and decentralized are 2 fundamental principles of resilience. In response, we are pursuing a diversified approach that including expanding undersea cable routes and landing station, incorporating microwave transmission system, and integrating satellite communication as contingency option to ensure the connectivity. In the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, Taiwan amended its legislation to allow data backup to be stored outside of Taiwan. This legal revision provides the foundation of Taiwan to establish hyperscale cloud infrastructure. In collaboration with trusted private sector partners, simultaneously we continue to tackle energy resilience challenge in parallel, strengthen our ability to manage and recover from disruption across both digital and physical domain. The warfare is evolving with technology advancement, and our defense strategy must evolve accordingly. I have to say that the war in Ukraine has promoted Taiwan to examine the reality of a conflict and check our level of readiness. We have come to understand strategic value of asymmetries, leading to greater investment in smart technologies such as a drone and the unmanned system. We are integrating artificial intelligence and advancing sensor vision, data vision, that kind of things. We also recognize importances of decentralization, commander, and granting greater autonomies to units on the ground. Lesson we draw directly from Ukrainian battlefield experience. When Taiwan had its first ever presidential election in 1996, after 37 years of martial law and one-party rule, we finally, for the first time, could vote and elect our own leader. China responds with missile test and military drill. China has been doing this repeatedly over the year and unfortunately intensified recently. This reminds us that we cannot take the
my point, which is this is a competition over who gets to define Taiwan's status. This is a competition over what kind of relationship the United States is going to have with Taiwan. This is a competition over what kind of status Taiwan is going to have. And it's all meant in the context of political warfare to strike a blow against the Taiwan population. For China to sit back and say, haha, our threats worked, and these people, the United States, are never going to come to your defense if they can't even send their speaker next time around because they caved into our threats. And we have to be very well aware that that's the game that's going on. That's the main game that's going on. The military threats and the kinetic threats and the possibility of escalating to kinetic is accompanying the primary political foundation of this competition, which is to redefine politics on Taiwan. In terms of the future, look, you know, the United States is a mixed bag when it comes to Biden, when it comes to Trump on Taiwan. So, you know, Biden said 4 times, you know, we're going to defend Taiwan, and lost an opportunity to explain that to the American people why that was important, right? In terms of political mobilization, in terms of pushing back against China's propaganda, in terms of pushing back against China's definition that the United States and Taiwan are the provocateurs, we lost a massive opportunity to say, why is it that we will defend Taiwan? We're going to defend, you know, the status quo. We're not the provocateurs. China wants war. We don't. All those things are part of how you defeat this political warfare context. And I think we need more of that going forward. But fundamentally, the United States has to understand, I think my country has to understand, that this is not about simply deterring a conventional conflict. This ongoing threat to Taiwan every day to demoralize it, we can lose that and lose the Taiwan's democracy before a shot's even fired.
Thank you, Dan. There was a question over here.
Thank you, Inga. I'm Domingo Yang from INDSR. I have a question for Professor Christian, and I hope Dan can also comment on it. Sir, I really appreciate your distinctions between strategic intimidation and also direct confrontation. So I wonder, when Chinese warship in this February of this year, they were conducting live firing drills in the Tasman Sea in between New Zealand and Australia, causing civilian flights reroute, and these Chinese warship even circumnavigate the entire Australia. Will you consider this as a strategic intimidation or direct confrontation? And also, when the Albanese government complained about this to Beijing, Beijing replied that they were surprised because these exercises were conducted in the so-called high sea, so that they should be legally grounded. And Beijing says that since Australia can conduct the exercises in the South China Sea, why can't Beijing conduct the exercises in the Tasman Sea? My question is, how can we push back such Chinese narratives? And this part, I really hope Dan can also jump in and comment on it. Thank you.
Christian.
Thank you so much for the question. It's a great one. And before I get started, I would like to push a little bit back against the overly use of the term warfare or hybrid warfare. Let's not forget that some of these things that we're talking here about are in the domain of diplomacy, including multilateral diplomacy. Some of the things that we're talking about here are also in the realm of international law. Right? All of that matters, and that brings me to the question of the exercises in a second. Let's also not forget that democratic values also mean to adhere to peaceful diplomacy, that it means to live up to multilateralism and to adhere international law. And when I'm saying international law, that not only means to, what we hear a lot of times, most recently, to defend international law, but also to make new international law when it is required. And that was earlier on one of my key arguments, that the gray zone space urgently needs attention in terms of making new international laws that can actually cope with it. Right now, this does not seem to be particularly popular, and one of the reasons for that is if there's something that a global hegemon doesn't like, then it is more international law. Right? If there's something that a small island state or smaller middle power urgently needs, then it is not necessarily the attention of the hegemon, but then it is international law. That is preliminary remarks. Now let's come to the question of the exercise. If you look into the law of the sea, there are two different interpretations in terms of the freedom to hold exercises. There's the argument, and that is largely promulgated by the United States, that exercises fall under freedom of navigation, and you have to inform the coastal state of your intention to conduct exercises. Now, then there are other countries, and that includes Vietnam, that includes Ireland, for instance, that are not so keen on having exercises in their exclusive economic zones. In the Irish case, it was the Russian Navy that wanted to conduct a live fire exercise in the exclusive economic zone. And for the case of Vietnam, you can guess. Right? So if we're analyzing Chinese exercises, we always have to keep in mind, what version of the law of the sea do we want? Do we want to have the version where there's the freedom to conduct exercises promoted by the United States? Or is it the more restricted version of the law of the sea, where the coastal states have much more power? I think it's a super important question. It's one of these many unresolved tensions in the law of the sea. And as many of you might know here in the room, one of the key problems of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is that we don't have a body through which we can internationally meet and interpret the law of the sea. We only have a General Assembly, a resolution, and annual, and we have the UN Security Council. That is a problem that actually needs fixing. Where are we going to discuss the question and develop the answer of how we want to interpret the law of the sea? So this is basically at stake. Just saying that this is gray zone warfare doesn't take us basically anywhere. We need to ask, how do we want to interpret this in terms of the law of the sea? And do we think it's illegal? But then, we have to move to the other interpretation, the non-American interpretation. So that is an answer, but I'm pretty sure there will be also other opinions on this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, China weaponizes the law for political warfare purposes. No other way to put it. I mean, I've worked at Department of Defense when the United States was lawfully operating in the exclusive economic zone, and China rammed an EP-3 and the Hainan Island, and that's just the tip of the spear. I mean, they've been doing this for 25 years, so there's no international law solution to China's weaponizing of the law for political and military purposes. On the Tasman Sea, the Chinese just aren't telling the truth. The idea that this is somehow tied to provocations in the South China Sea, where the Australians are lawfully operating freedom of navigation, is just simply not true. That the Chinese were caught or wanted to be caught recently in their operations around Australia, but they've been operating around Australia for years now. The Australians have been one of the reasons the Australians got so mobilized is not just the internal political influence campaign they found, but the fact that the PLA is operating more and more around Oceania, for military and political purposes. So it's being highlighted, and the Chinese are making another specious argument so that the West can wrap itself around in circles about who's acting lawfully and who's not acting lawfully. But the fact of the matter is the PLA wants to act unlawfully inside and around Oceania in order to control the second island chain.
Yes, one thing regarding the exercise you mentioned in Irish waters. It had an interesting continuation, that case. So the Irish government didn't want the Russians to exercise and asked politely, please, can you not exercise in our economic zone? And the Russians said, well, we'll do as we like. We are not in the business of adhering to your polite requests or polite pleas. So then, I guess some people in the room may remember what happened, but it's such a good story to tell and to remember, because it illustrates the power of wider society. So Irish fishermen who fish in these waters when they heard there was going to be an exercise, that obviously meant that they would not be able to fish there. They would lose significant income. So they said, we will not put up with the Russian exercise in our fishing waters. And they said, we're going to sail out and sail 24 hours a day. So essentially preventing the Russians from conducting their exercise. And that's precisely what happened. The Russians had to head home, exercise uncompleted, not even initiated. And to me, that illustrated the power of wider society in coming up with solutions. But there is, as you say, Christian, a drawback to that, which is that if our navies were to want to exercise in another country's exclusive economic zone, and that country said, no, we don't want you to exercise there, and then their fishermen may sail out on their behalf and say, well, we are going to fish here, and that will prevent you from conducting your exercise. So there is always that side to consider if we try to be innovative. We, our governments, or indeed parts of our societies, try to be innovative in applying UNCLOS.
And that is actually a fascinating insight because, of course, China regularly uses maritime militia. So it's a kind of mirroring of a response, isn't it? Although for them, obviously, it's got a different flavor to it. Well, we unfortunately have to wrap it up there. I'd like us all to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions today.